Number 5. The Brookings Report. In the year 1960, NASA's Committee on Long-Range Studies partnered with the Brookings Institution to create a report for the House Committee on Science and Astronautics titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. Not surprisingly, when talked about in general conversations between UFO and alien believers, it is referred to instead as the Brookings Report. Most of the report is not particularly interesting for the purposes of this list, with sections about the implications of a space-derived weather predicting system and the implications of technological byproducts. But there is a section of the report that has garnered much attention over the years about the implications of a discovery of extraterrestrial life. This section theorizes about how the public would react to the discovery of alien life, and how it would affect society, and how the decision would have to be made on whether or not such a discovery would be made public. Some choice passages are as follows. Anthropological files contain many examples of societies, sure of their place in the universe, which have disintegrated when they have had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies, espousing different ideas and different ways of life. Others that survived such an experience usually did so by paying the price of changes in values and attitudes and behavior. Studies might help to provide programs for meeting and adjusting to the implications of such a discovery. Questions one might wish to answer by such studies would include how might such information, under what circumstances, be presented to or withheld from the public for what ends? What might be the role of the discovering scientists and other decision makers regarding release of the fact of discovery? While it is important to note that the report does not state whether the government should or should not cover up the existence of alien life should it be discovered, it does state that this is a choice that would have to be made. This report was developed relatively early in the history of space exploration and was presented to policymakers. So, we do know that people in charge of government policy were presented with a document that floated the idea of hiding the discovery of alien life from the people of Earth. I don't think the writers of the report were trying to hide anything, but the fact that a report featuring a section on what courses of action should be taken if, hypothetically, alien life were discovered, was commissioned makes me wonder if this was actually just a way to get the answers they needed without revealing the true implications of the report to the writers. Number 4. The astronaut accusation. One of the leading causes of people who claim to believe in aliens and UFOs not being taken seriously is a perceived lack of credibility. If someone reports seeing a UFO, many people immediately assume that the person either saw an airplane from a weird angle, is lying, or is insane. Which is part of why it is so exciting when someone with a staggering amount of credibility comes out in support of the idea of alien life. Edgar Mitchell is one such person. Not only does he have 2 Bachelor of Science degrees, as well as a doctorate in aeronautics from MIT, but he is also a former NASA astronaut who was the 6th man in history to walk on the moon as part of the 1971 Apollo 14 mission. In fact, he is tied with fellow astronaut Alan Shepard for the record of the longest moonwalk in history, having tread its surface for over 9 hours straight during his mission. Mitchell has not said he knows this for sure, but he said in an interview in 2008, when asked about his opinion on alien life, that yes, there's not much question at all that there is life throughout the universe. I'm totally sure we're not alone. He went on to claim that he had intelligence that proved, quote, that we have been visited on this planet and the UFO phenomenon is real, though it's been covered up by governments for the last 60 years or so. In other interviews, Mitchell has confirmed the 1947 Roswell incident and has described aliens as harmless little people. When asked about the former astronaut's comments, NASA curtly replied, quote, NASA does not track UFOs. Dr. Mitchell is a great American, but we do not share his opinion on this issue. Number 3. The MJ-12 documents. When John F. Kennedy was made President of the United States in 1960, he quickly developed a reputation of not being a fan of the intelligence community. He believed that certain information should be shared with the people they were governing, and perhaps even more surprisingly, felt that some information should be shared with their Soviet counterparts, in the interest of developing a relationship and de-escalating the Cold War in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He apparently drafted and sent a memorandum in 1963, 2 weeks before his death, that requested that NASA initiate broader cooperation with the USSR in their outer space and lunar landing programs. Part of this document says that NASA would have to share classified UFO secrets with the Soviets. It has been claimed that the idea of sharing this information with an enemy state was the last straw for the intelligence community, all of whom apparently formed together to pool information and plans in a group called the Majestic 12, supposedly formed by President Truman in 1947 to deal with UFO activity. In documents that had apparently been saved from a fire known as the MJ-12 documents, it is stated that Kennedy has been making inquiries about the Majestic 12's activities that cannot be allowed. The document goes on to talk about how the issue should be handled, saying that when conditions become non-conducive for growth in our environment and Washington cannot be influenced any further, the weather is lacking any precipitation and should be wet. Well, for the layman, this is more confusing than anything. It may be clear when you consider that wet work is a euphemism for assassination. It should of course be noted that official government agencies claim that these documents are forgeries, but it's not like an intelligence agency partially responsible for the death of a president is going to verify documents that supposedly implicate them. Was President Kennedy killed for trying to force NASA to share information on UFOs with the Soviet Union? If these documents are authentic, it would certainly seem to be the case. Number 2. Gordon Cooper's Alien Adventures. Gordon Cooper is an important figure in the history of space travel, having served as an aerospace engineer, a test pilot, a pilot for the United States Air Force, and was the youngest of the 7 original Project Mercury astronauts. He was the first American to spend a day in space, the first to sleep in space, and was the last American to go on a solo orbital mission. And he set the space endurance record when he traveled 3,312,993 miles in 190 hours and 56 minutes, thus proving that astronauts could survive in space for the length of time that would be required to travel to the moon and back. He was an extremely important historical figure, but unlike many other NASA astronauts, he was not shy about talking about the various experiences he had over the years with unidentified flying objects and the government's efforts to cover these experiences up. Gordon Cooper claimed that he had seen his first UFO while flying over West Germany in 1951, but that his first experience with government cover-ups came in 1957 while he was stationed at the Edwards Air Force Base in California. He had put a crew in charge of setting up an Ascania cinetheodolite, which is a photographic instrument used for collecting trajectory data of aircraft, missiles, rockets, and other similar equipment. The equipment was set up on a dry lake bed and set to take pictures at 30 frames per second as aircraft landed. The men later reported to Cooper that they had seen something odd and had captured images of a strange-looking saucer-like aircraft that hadn't made a sound while landing or taking off. The men were used to seeing experimental aircraft, but were unnerved at the sight of this saucer, which had hovered over them, landed about 50 yards away using 3 extended landing gears, but had taken off when they had approached for a closer look. Cooper called a special Pentagon number which was meant for reporting such phenomena, and was told to have the film developed, to make no prints of it, and to send it to them in a locked courier pouch. However, as Cooper would later admit, they hadn't told him not to look at the negatives before sending them out. He looked at them and saw incredibly high-quality images of the flying saucer. He had expected there to be a follow-up investigation, but he never heard anything further. He tried to track down what happened to the images, but never found out, assuming that they ended up in the Air Force's Project Blue Book, which was the Air Force's official UFO investigation. He had to deal with more government concealment, this time from NASA, when he did his solo orbital mission in 1963. While being broadcast live on NBC, Cooper told Mission Control that he could see a glowing green object which was rapidly approaching his craft. The object was not an illusion, and even showed up on radar, but when he returned to Earth, he was forbidden to talk about the experience any further with the press. The reporters brought in for the subsequent press conference for the mission were also told they could not ask Cooper about the green orb either. Years later, Cooper would talk about his encounter more openly and discuss the fact that NASA and other government agencies were covering up several stories of UFO encounters. He even spoke to the United Nations on the subject, saying, "Authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders. So the password still is, we have to avoid panic by all means." Did Gordon Cooper really see multiple UFOs during his life? And if so, did NASA and the Air Force prevent the public from learning about these visitors from another planet in an effort to avoid panic? Will there ever be a point in history where they trust the people of the world to be able to handle such news? Much like the identity of the flying saucers pilots, it is unknown. Number 1. The Pentagon accusation. When the subject of aliens or UFOs comes up with government officials, they are often dismissed with a joke about how the only people who believe in such things are crazy conspiracy theorists. But every once in a while, a government employee will come forward and make claims that such theories are not as crazy as the government would have you believe. Luis Elizondo is one such man. Luis was the head of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program from 2010 until 2017, where he apparently had access to the Pentagon's data on UFOs and had to interview military eyewitnesses of UFO phenomena on a near daily basis. He claims that he spent much of his time at the Pentagon trying to get his program to be taken seriously, but that he was suppressed by other branches of the government, such as NASA, for fear that news of alien visitors would incite mass panic. Other government personnel who tried to keep him quiet apparently did so out of religious reasons, with one claiming that he should stop pursuing UFOs and instead read his Bible, as such craft were probably demons. Elizondo has described seeing footage of crafts that have been able to reach speeds of up to 11,000 miles per hour, while still being able to make seemingly impossible instant 90-degree turns. Other craft have apparently been capable of flight with no visible means of propulsion, meaning that whoever is piloting these craft is in possession of technology generations more advanced than any currently found on Earth. Luis left his position in 2017 in frustration at the refusal of the various branches of government to brief officials or the public on the multitude of UFO sightings they have collected over the years, and the government has tried to discredit him by saying that he had no assigned responsibilities for the AATIP, but this was challenged when former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid released a statement that Elizondo was indeed in a leadership role in the ATIP program. The fact that the government is working so hard to discredit someone who is trying to inform the public about a matter of public importance is disturbing, but unfortunately, not surprising.
Number 5. Leland Melvin. American engineer and now retired NASA astronaut Leland Melvin has spent hundreds of hours in space. Literally hundreds. Leland holds 4 honorary doctorates for his service in education, the sciences, and philanthropy. Doctorates. I'm just saying that before the comments start rolling in saying he's just another wacko. He's crazy. They're not wackos, people. Any of them. They've been screened so many times by so many people with so many tests, they have to be damn well near perfect before going up on or in NASA's budget. Before his career with NASA, Leland was actually All-American for football. Detroit Lions, Toronto Argos. Guy made the NFL and then said, you know what? I think I'm gonna be an astronaut. Like, give this guy a Netflix movie, would ya? He was selected by NASA in 1998 after getting injured with a football career. Guy goes from the turf to working at NASA Langley Center. This guy's put in time, both down here and up there. Mission after mission with NASA. He's got quite the practice at the whole floating around thing. When Leland was pressed about otherworldly visitors and his ideas about the cosmos, he said this when he was working up in orbit. He had seen something translucent, curved and organic looking when he was working with fellow astronaut Randy Bresnik. The pair of them, called down to NASA to ask what it could be. NASA's official response was, probably ice. Yeah, nice and specific there, Houston. Thank you for that. When has NASA ever said probably? Melvin dismissed this and figured it was NASA's explanation to just cover it up. Like, who's more qualified here? That's all I'm asking. When the most qualified people are like, yeah, I can't tell if that's frozen water or a full-on mothership, Houston. Either they shouldn't be up there at all, or we need some more Windex on those windows there, NASA. Huh? Number 4. Ivan Wagner. As always, if you dig what we do here at Top 5 Scary, make sure you hit that like button or comment down below. It really helps the channel out. Have you ever seen a UFO out there? Yeah, you. Have you seen one? Comment down below with some details about your experiences. I know I have. Twice now. Hence the obsession with all this stuff. Those Reddit rabbit holes, boy oh boy. Speaking of falling into a wormhole of conspiracy and who said what, astronaut Ivan Wagner, or I should say cosmonaut Ivan Wagner, since he's Russian by birth, and although he's bunking up with some roomies up there in the ISS, he was on the ISS as a first timer just back in 2020. Does NASA initiate rookies up there? Like pull pranks on the newbies? Like no gravity, just unbuckle you while you sleep, flow you out, you know? He and fellow Russian Anatoly Ivanishin were working up there alongside Chris Cassidy, the American commander of said expedition. When Wagner was orbiting the Earth, he might have captured some footage of UFOs, better known as UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. It's the jargon nowadays. The aurora lights behind Earth's beautiful curves was being recorded from the ISS when he saw a string of really weird lights moving in a really weird way. He labeled the video Space Guests. Wagner tweeted the vid, which apparently shows the aurora australis near Antarctica, and then all of a sudden this blob of organized lights just cruises on over the globe. Looks like a blob of like glitter just trucking across space. Like, what is that? Of course, NASA didn't follow up. Like, what are they gonna say? Oh yeah, those are stars that move and blink, I think. I mean, no? Space junk. Yeah, space debris and swamps and things. Also, what a lame excuse. Space junk? Okay, so you're saying there's lots of litter up there, that's what you're saying? That's what just zipped over my house silently, defying gravity and lasered up my cow? Yeah, I don't think so, NASA. Number 3, Chris Hadfield. Retired Canadian astronaut, engineer, fighter pilot, and musician. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Hadfield flew 2 missions and also served as commander on the International Space Station. Before his career as an astronaut, he served in the Canadian Armed Forces for 25 years as an air commander fighter pilot. So he has the credentials to say the least. In 1992, Hadfield was accepted into the Canadian astronaut program. He first flew in space in 1995, and since then, he says he's seen tons of stuff up there just zipping around that even a man with all those credentials says he can't explain. Quote, I've seen countless things in the sky, but he has a pretty cool take on it. He doesn't keep it on the DL, he doesn't boast, and he doesn't panic. Seems like Chris has the mentality like, quote, to see something in the sky that you don't understand and then to immediately conclude it's intelligent life from another solar system is the height of foolishness and lack of logic. However, Chris seems to have a little dirt on Mars that maybe we all don't. He said, I think the fundamental question is that Mars was a lot like Earth 4 billion years ago when life first formed. So if it happened here, did it happen there? It would be evident somewhere in the geologic records. All we need is one fossil for proof. He thinks there could be potentially alien life in the clouds of Venus or on the distant moons of one of our gas giants. Researchers have suggested that there could be microbial life in the clouds of Venus because of the presence of ammonia, which on Earth is a key indicator of aquatic life. Aquatic life, eh? Atlanteans? Hadfield on the UAP phenomenon, quote, we have 7 people living up there. We've been sending people to space since I was born. I spent half a year off planet looking everywhere. It makes no sense at all that intelligent life somewhere from not our solar system could cross interstellar space and just sneak around and only be caught on some strange video by fighter pilots. It just doesn't pass any basic sniff test or logic. It's fun, it's exciting, but if you use reason, the whole argument falls apart. End quote. Okay, Chris Hadfield, keep your secrets for now, you polite Canadian you. Wait till people start looking into Paul Hellyer, another very polite Canadian with some secrets of his own. Until then, you keep distracting us up there with that guitar, Chris. I see you, Jake Sully. Number 2, Michael Collins. NASA veteran and the very first driver up there, Mr. Michael Collins himself, served as command module pilot on the historic Apollo 11 mission in 1969. When Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon for the very first time, saying those very first famous lines we all know so well, Collins was back parking that thing up there. Mr. Collins stayed up there by himself in lunar orbit waiting for the safe return of his crewmates. I can't even stay in a basement with the lights off by myself. Imagine being up there just drifting in the currents of matter, like being in the middle of the ocean. Yeah, no way, dude. The astronaut retired from NASA in 1970 and spent his free time answering questions on Twitter. Apparently, he has gotten some really interesting buzz. Mr. Collins invited the interweb to chat, saying, quote, "Are we alone? Hashtag Ask Michael Collins." And boy, oh boy, did he get some responses. Everything from wackos who like aliens to very, very high-ranked generals and pilots who are apparently also wackos who like aliens for talking about this. Collins, quote, "I used to think that NASA sent me to the wrong place, to the moon, because I think Mars is a much more interesting place," end quote. Collins has talked about it in the past about the possibility of alien life existing beyond Earth and doesn't shy away from discussing the topic in full. In 1999, for instance, he even argued on the topic of life developing in other parts of this infinite cosmos. So maybe it has then. He wrote in his book saying, quote, "I am alone now. Truly alone, and absolutely isolated from any known life. Although I may feel like I'm the same person, I also feel that I am different from other people. I have been places and done things you simply would not believe." Collins circled the moon once every 2 hours. What's scarier, walking on an unknown rock that apparently no one's ever visited, or flying all the way around it by yourself in the pitch black with no communications? Collins achieved the rank of Major General. He left NASA in 1970 to join the State Department and later became director of the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington. One of the most key players in this whole thing. Michael Collins sadly passed in 2021. Number 1. Buzz Aldrin. Of course, the poster child for the whole phenomenon itself, Mr. Edwin Eugene Aldrin Jr. American astronaut, engineer, fighter pilot with a doctorate of science in astronautics. This guy is overqualified, okay? 3 spacewalks in 1966, Gemini 12 mission in 1969, Apollo 11 mission. He and mission commander Neil Armstrong were the first 2 people to land on the moon. Quote, "There was something out there, close enough to be observed. What could it be?" According to Aldrin, on Apollo 11 to the moon, quote, "I observed a light out the window that appeared to be moving alongside us. What could that have been other than a spacecraft from another country or another world? It was either the rocket that had separated from us or the 4 panels that moved away when we extracted the lander, right?" After he returned from his missions, he was convinced he saw aliens while he was out there. Credentials aside, he took a lie detector test, people, which he passed with flying colors. In an interview with C-SPAN Buzz, he talked about the future potential of Earth's moon for humanity. He added a little extra info that might have gained the spark to go back, regarding a certain monolith on a moon. Quote, "Visit the moon Phobos of Mars. There's a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this little potato object that goes around Mars once in every 7 hours. When people find out about that, they're gonna say, who put that there? And you bet, Buzz, I'll be the first one to ask that."
Number 5. Weird signal from the Milky Way. Astronomers have been studying fast radio bursts, or FRBs, that's a little acronym there to make me sound smart, for decades outside of our galaxy in the hopes of someday making some contact with our extraterrestrial friends and saying hello. Well, decades of research might have paid off when on April 28th, 2020, 2 ground-based radio telescopes discovered an intense pulse of radio waves within the Milky Way. This event was the first time an FRB had ever been detected within the galaxy, and somehow, despite this burst only lasting for a millisecond, it was apparently almost impossible to miss. I know what all of these words mean for sure. The burst was 30,000 light years away from Earth, so, you know, about a stone's throw up that way, really just a block away on the cosmic scale. It was first discovered by the CHIME, a fancy acronym for the Canadian Hydrogen Intensity Mapping Experiment, as well as another project, the STARE, the Survey for Transient Astronomical Radio Emission. I just woke up, man, and I don't really know what these acronyms mean either, but I'm having a lot of fun saying them for you, and I hope you enjoy that. This discovery was notable as well for being the most energetic radio blast these astronomers have ever seen, but it was also one of the closest. Usually when we're talking about radio frequencies all the way up in space, these things are like billions of years of light years away, which does not make them particularly easy to study. You know, you're getting a real far away glance. But if there's one on our doorstep, way easier to focus on. So what is this weird signal coming out of the Milky Way? Is this aliens trying to send a text and the reception's a bit foggy? Here's the trouble. Astronomers don't know for sure just yet. 3 years later, we are still not 100%. There is a small possibility, a disappointing one, that this signal could be man-made somehow and it's broadcasting all the way out here. But if not, this could very well be a promising sign of life from across the galaxy. And if you're looking for more alien content, we have got more UFO sightings than probably any other YouTube channel on this site, and I'm like pretty sure of that. But if space stuff ain't your jam, we got cryptids, monsters, mythologies, true crime, fake crime stories, too good to be true and too true to be good. So click through, stay subscribed, stay screaming, and stay watching this video, okay? All the way to the end. I got a little surprise for you, I promise. Alright, moving on. Number 4, the sounds of Ganymede. Have you ever heard a planet talk? I don't mean like going for a hike and communing with trees and talking to nature or anything like that, man, okay? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like literally hearing the sounds a planet produces. Now you're gonna have to bear with me because I don't know if you can tell by looking at me, but I am not a rocket scientist. I'm barely even a YouTube host. But as I understand, when Juno, a NASA satellite, was orbiting Ganymede, one of Jupiter's moons, NASA discovered that Ganymede had its own magnetosphere. Ganymede was radiating this strange plasma wave of energy that, when is recorded and played back, sounds absolutely terrifying. This really like tickles the H.P. Lovecraft fan in my heart to be able to hear the sounds a planet is making out in the cosmos. So we're gonna play it for you now. Just take a listen to the audio of this and try to ever sleep again. I dare you. found that pretty scary personally. I don't know, reminds me of my insignificance in the galaxy. But more than a few people on YouTube pointed out, if you just close your eyes and imagine that that's R2-D2 making all of those noises, it's not particularly scary at all. And I'm probably never gonna be able to unhear that. So is this proof of alien life hiding out inside of Jupiter's moon? Well, not quite. This is a natural phenomenon. It's definitely mysterious though, and it makes you think about the size of the cosmos and how small we are on a galactic scale, but other than that, this thing coming from Ganymede is explainable, if not a little bit confusing. I just wanted to toss it like smack dab in the middle of this list about alien speculation to keep things a little fun, fresh, and flirty for everybody. Number 3, the USS Jellyfish. That's a fun name, isn't it? That's kind of fun. The USS Jellyfish kind of calls to mind like a big ship, maybe like a cruise ship, taking an all-included trip through the Bahamas. Well, not to burst your dreams of an island getaway, but the actual USS Jellyfish is a celestial object that astronomers have found that has had them asking questions that are really stinging. That was forced. That was really forced. That was not natural at all. I'm sorry. The USS Jellyfish is a giant mass of plasma that has taken the shape of a jellyfish. At least that's the best way we can see it. It's kind of like an ink blot test. You see what you want to see. It's some 300 million light years away and is a fancy radio signal called a polyphoenix, which is a term scientists use for a radio frequency up in space that they don't really have all the answers about. The giant blob in particular is so unusual that when astronomers initially discovered it, they were writing it off completely, assuming it was an accident or an error in their data. The researcher who first discovered it, one Torrance Hodgson, captured the subject in 2017 using the Murchison Wide Array, an incredibly powerful Australian ground telescope. And when he wrote on the subject, he told his colleagues, ignore the obvious bug in this data. And it was only when they were really pushing that they began to notice there was something more to it than these formal studies earlier suggested. Now, I'm gonna be honest, the full-scale implications of the space jellyfish are a little bit above my pay grade. I can kind of just look at it and be like, well, that's kind of weird. I can read to you the scientists, theories for what they think created the jellyfish, but just know I only kind of half know what I'm talking about here. Scientists believe that the jellyfish was formed over the course of 2 billion years, structured smack dab in the middle between two galaxies that have been spewing out enormous amounts of light and plasma due to intense interactions between black holes and any materials that end up falling around them, eventually creating one gigantic cosmic jellyfish floating around in the astral planes. Number 2, something unusual. Recently, a team of astronomers discovered something unusual while they were mapping out the universe, which is my favorite start to a point I have ever read on this channel. You guys know when you're mapping out the universe, then you accidentally see something unusual? Ugh, I absolutely hate when that happens. Anyway, this mysterious unusual object floats about 4,000 light years away, very close by. You can practically wave and see it. And it's pulsing strange bursts of energy out of it roughly every 20 minutes on the dot. You can set your watch to this. Somebody up in space forget to turn the oven timer off? Natasha Hurley Walker is an astrophysicist from the Curtin University in Australia, same university that discovered that jellyfish coincidentally, and was the leading researcher on this study. She said in a public statement that this object was appearing and disappearing over a few hours during our observations, and said that it was completely unexpected. It was kind of spooky for an astronomer because there's nothing known in the sky that does that. Let me take over for a second right here and tell you right now, on Top 5 Scary, if you can't tell what something weird is in the sky, it's an alien. Okay? You got an alien on your hands. So we have to assume that's what's going on here. Alongside this bizarre cosmic alarm clock, the team discovered a fossil plasma source, something that was created by powerful blasts of a bygone black hole that has since faded into the darkness. And I loved saying that. A black hole that has faded into the darkness? That's poetic. Does that not sound like where the heart of like cosmic evil in the universe would be? Does that not sound a little bit like it's something out of a Lovecraft or Stephen King book? A fossilized plasma created by the blast of a black hole that has faded into the darkness? That sounds like something a guy in a black robe would read out as part of a prophecy for the end of the universe. And number 1, Proxima Centauri. If there was ever going to be concrete signs of alien life, I think it would definitely come from a place called Proxima Centauri. Listen to that. That already sounds like it's from like a great Deep Space Nine episode. Recently, astronomers exploring for signs of life beyond Earth discovered a currently unexplained radio signal that was broadcasting from Proxima Centauri, a small red star roughly 4.2 million light years away. That's like right next door, man. If this wasn't exciting enough for you, there's radio signals coming from a strange star that no one can explain, seemingly. And surrounding these stars is a planet that NASA believes has a temperate and rocky surface just like our beautiful Earth, leading to some wild speculation all around. The project is dubbed Breakthrough Listen, very cool code name, and it was a decade-long search for alien broadcasts from the nearest million stars, just in case anybody's been trying to reach us about our planet's extended warranty. This radio signal in question has been formally dubbed BLC-1 when referred to scientifically. Now, this signal was first discovered in May 2019. It's not quite the be-all and end-all proof of aliens just yet, as much as I want it to be. Sophia Sheik, the team member leading Breakthrough Listen, says she suspects that the broadcast could end up being human in origin somehow, theorizing that it could be something as simple as like a plane traveling overhead their equipment or faulty electronics somewhere getting wires tangled. Would that not be beyond embarrassing if you're a group of scientists, astronomers, and you think you've found proof of alien life, but all it is somebody forgot to take their phone off airplane mode and they've just been getting notifications for Candy Crush and it's messing with your equipment. Still, it's something to research, and it's still one of the most exciting things to happen in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence in a long time. And I hope we keep looking for extraterrestrial intelligence out there, because there sure ain't anybody down here. I messed up that joke.
Number 5. The Pentagon accusation. When the subject of aliens or UFOs comes up with the government officials, they are often dismissed with a joke about how the only people who believe in such things are crazy conspiracy theorists. But every once in a while, a government employee will come forward and make claims that such theories are not as crazy as the government would have you believe. Luis Elizondo is one such man. Luis was the head of the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program from 2010 until 2017, where he apparently had access to the Pentagon's data on UFOs and had to interview military eyewitnesses of UFO phenomena on a near daily basis. He claims that he spent much of his time at the Pentagon trying to get his program to be taken seriously, but that he was suppressed by other branches of the government, such as NASA, for fears that news of alien visitors would incite mass panic. Other government personnel who tried to keep him quiet apparently did so out of religious reasons, with one claiming that he should stop pursuing UFOs and instead read his Bible, as such craft were probably demons. Elizondo has described seeing footage of crafts that have been able to reach speeds of up to 11,000 miles per hour, while still being able to make seemingly impossible instant 90-degree turns. Other craft have apparently been capable of flight with no visible means of propulsion, meaning that whoever is piloting these crafts is in possession of technology generations more advanced than any currently found on Earth. Luis left his position in 2017 in frustration at the refusal of the various branches of government to brief officials or the public on the multitude of UFO sightings they have collected over the years, and the government has tried to discredit him by saying that he had no assigned responsibilities for the AATIP. This was challenged when former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid released a statement that Elizondo was indeed in a leadership role in the AATIP program. The fact that the government is working so hard to discredit someone who is trying to inform the public about a matter of public importance is disturbing, but unfortunately not surprising. Number 4. The hacker's discovery. In 2002, a Scottish systems administrator and hacker named Gary McKinnon perpetrated the biggest military computer hack of all time by hacking into 97 NASA and US military computers over the span of 13 months. He claimed that the reason for this behavior was to search for evidence of free energy suppression and any other potential cover-ups by NASA of UFOs or technologies that could be useful to the public. Once caught and arrested, there was a lengthy court case to determine whether or not he should be extradited to the United States to serve his sentence. The news focused mainly on the crime and the subsequent court case, so much so that not many people looked into whether or not he found any evidence of what he was looking for. But according to McKinnon, he did. While looking through NASA's computers, he claims that he came across a document titled Non-Terrestrial Officers. He looked at the document and found an Excel sheet containing the ranks and names of several unknown individuals and a sheet with tabs for material transfers between ships. He then searched records for ships with the corresponding names and found nothing, leading him to believe that the ships were part of a covert non-terrestrial initiative. After a lengthy court case, the United Kingdom decided not to extradite him to the United States, claiming that the crime was committed due to mental illness, and that sending him away would be a violation of his human rights. Is this really the case? Or did he find something in those computers that he was able to trade to the United Kingdom's government in order to avoid being shipped abroad? Number 3. The Challenger accusation. On January 28, 1986, NASA launched the Space Shuttle Challenger. It had 7 people on board, 6 astronauts and 1 teacher, who had been selected to be a part of the mission as part of NASA's Teacher in Space program. Their mission was to study Halley's Comet as it passed near the Sun and to deploy a tracking and data relay satellite. Due to the novelty of a teacher in space, millions of school children were watching the launch in class when it occurred at 11:39 a.m. Tragically, 73 seconds into the shuttle's launch, Challenger broke apart and all 7 passengers were lost. President Ronald Reagan created the Rogers Commission to investigate the incident. It was discovered that the cause of the accident was the rubber O-rings, which were supposed to act as a seal in the shuttle's solid rocket boosters, but had stiffened due to the cold of the day, causing them to be less effective in causing the pressurized gas to leak and burn through an attachment strut and the external propellant tank. The combined stress caused the shuttle to be torn apart. The investigation also found a few more details that caused some scandal for NASA. It was discovered that concerns about the O-rings had been raised by NASA engineers since the early 70s, but that NASA had deemed the component acceptable despite the engineers' protests and suggestions that further reinforcement be given to the rings. In 1980, the NASA Verification Committee requested further tests on the joints the rings were reinforcing to test how they would behave at different temperatures. A test that would have exposed the Challenger's fatal flaw, but the program managers decided that such tests were unnecessary. It turned out that other missions in the years between the request for more tests and the Challenger mission had had problems with the O-rings, with them showing signs of erosion or letting in soot, showing that they were not providing a reliable seal. NASA also claimed that all passengers had met their end instantly and without pain, but it was discovered that the astronauts had discovered their emergency breathing packs, showing that they were alive and trying to survive well after the initial explosion. A member of the commission, Robert B. Hotz, went so far as to accuse NASA of a cover-up in both the Miami Herald and the New York Times, saying that their initial statements about the astronauts and other actions by the space agency were part of a broad effort to keep the public from learning that the Challenger crew members might have survived the disaster if certain precautions had been taken. NASA denied such an effort, but as a result of the commission, NASA had to establish the Office of Safety, Reliability, and Quality Assurance to ensure that future missions did not neglect the safety of their crew in such a fatal way. Number 2. Life on Mars. One of the most common accusations against NASA is that they are covering up evidence of alien life on other planets, specifically Mars. While there are too many of these accusations to dive into in great detail, we will be looking at 2 in particular. Richard Hoagland is one of the many people convinced that there is evidence of ancient civilizations on Mars due to NASA photographs that were taken during the 1976 Viking 1 orbit. These photos show what has been dubbed by believers as the Mars face, a large sphinx-like object. In 1998, the Mars Global Surveyor sent photos of Mars's surface back to Earth, showing only a pile of rocks, noticeably lacking the iconic profile, claiming that it debunked the theory. Hoagland called this a load of baloney, and unearthed a NASA-commissioned report from 1960 recommending that any future discoveries of alien life be kept from the public so as to not disturb the evolutionary flow of the 20th century civilization. Nearly 20 years later, a researcher named Barry de Gregorio, who specializes in the study of microscopic life in Earth's soil, looked at photos released by NASA, and realizing how similar shapes and patterns in the photos were to Ordovician trace fossils he has photographed on Earth, claimed that the Mars pictures appeared to feature trace fossils made by soft-bodied life forms. NASA claims that the shapes are merely rock crystals which are being analyzed. The researcher claims that this is a cover-up, and that he is planning on releasing a report that will blow the lid off of the cover-up. He theorizes theorizes that NASA is covering the findings up to avoid jeopardizing their planned 2030 Mars mission. It is hard to say if Mars is or ever was populated by an alien race, but if they were, would NASA tell us if they found evidence once they got there? Number 1. The astronaut accusation. One of the leading causes of people who claim to believe in aliens and UFOs not being taken seriously is a perceived lack of credibility. If someone reports seeing a UFO, many people immediately assume that the person either saw an airplane from a weird angle, is lying, or is insane. Which is part of why it is so exciting when someone with a staggering amount of credibility comes out in support of the idea of alien life. Edgar Mitchell is one such person. Not only does he have 2 Bachelor of Science degrees as well as a doctorate in aeronautics from MIT, but he is also a former NASA astronaut who was the 6th man in history to walk on the moon as part of the 1971 Apollo 14 mission. In fact, he is tied with fellow astronaut Alan Shepard for the record of the longest moonwalk in history, having tread its surface for over 9 hours straight during his mission. Mitchell has not said how he knows this for sure, but he said in an interview in 2008, when asked about his opinion on alien life, that yes, there's not much question at all that there is life throughout the universe. I'm totally sure we are not alone. He went on to claim that he had intelligence that proved, quote, that we have been visited on this planet and the UFO phenomenon is real, though it's been covered up by governments for the last 60 years or so. In other interviews, Mitchell has confirmed the 1947 Roswell incident and has described aliens as harmless little people. When asked about the former astronaut's comments, NASA curtly replied, quote, NASA does not track UFOs. Dr. Mitchell is a great American, but we do not share his opinion on this issue.
Number 5. Al Worden. American test pilot, engineer, and NASA astronaut Alfred Merrill Worden was the module pilot for the Apollo 15 lunar mission in 1971. One of the 24 people who have flown to the moon. Woohoo! He's got a couple of firsts though. He orbited it 74 times in the command module. He was the first to drive a moon car. After Apollo 15 reached lunar orbit and his crewmates departed, and Worden spent 3 days alone in his module. That's terrifying. Traveling the furthest out from any other human. After he returned, the crew and him became involved in a NASA controversy, however. Not over leaked alien info, but over postage stamps they had taken to the moon. Yeah, big no-no apparently. They were reprimanded by NASA and did not fly in space again. Worden remained at NASA until 1975, then entered a private sector. And then it gets weird. On a British television morning show, Al Worden started talking about some interesting stuff. They asked him, why should we keep going back to the moon? He paused and replied, survival. Survival of our species. Worden also rejected the notion that humans could colonize planets within our solar system, calling them unsustainable. Then he claims he knows where to find habitable planets. When pressed on aliens if he believes them or not, he said, yes. You know, I've been asked that question hundreds of times. Yeah, we are the aliens though. We just think there's somebody else. But we were the ones who came from somewhere else because somebody else had to survive. They got in their little spaceship and they came here and they landed and they started civilization here. And if you don't believe me, go get books on the ancient Sumerians and see what they have to say about it. They'll tell you right up front, end quote. Okay, when you hear an astronaut say that, kinda jarring. Number 4, Roswell. As always, if you dig what we do here on Top 5 Scary, make sure you hit that like button. Birth of the UAP phenomenon. 1945, the US's first nuclear explosion. 1946, first underwater nuclear explosion. 1947, the first crash flying saucer. Coincidence? I think not. Especially since they've been known to hover around nuclear bases. Probably for the better. Humans are kind of the worst. Local rancher Mac Brazel finds the wreckage on his property in Lincoln County, New Mexico. Sheriff Wilcox shows RAAF's commanding officer Colonel Blanchard the materials, and during the night, the Air Force combs the entirety of the property, apparently harboring 2 small injured alien bodies. Taking them, of course, to Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico that night. And the very next morning, the Roswell Air Force makes a statement claiming they have recovered a crashed flying disc in local newspapers. Boom! History, baby! Photographs of Jesse Marcel, the head intelligence officer who investigated and recovered some of the debris. The very next day, the Army retracts their statement and all of a sudden, a high-altitude weather balloon. Can you believe that, huh? AKA the birth of a conspiracy theory. Nuclear fission explosions, weather balloons. Something's not adding up here. Number 3, Edgar Mitchell. Edgar Dean Mitchell was a U.S. Navy officer, aviator, test pilot, engineer, NASA astronaut, and of course, a ufologist. Ufology is the pseudo term for somebody who studies the UFO phenomenon. I don't think there's a degree you can get that in. If so, I'm signing up. What school? What school, sorry? He was the lunar module pilot of the Apollo 14 in 1971 and spent 9 hours working on the lunar surface. He was the 6th person to walk on the moon. Yeah, he was walking while Worden was up there drifting in the currents of space. Mitchell publicly expressed his opinions and that he was sure that there were thousands of UFOs recorded since the early 1940s belonging to other planets. Thousands. Dateline NBC conducted an interview with Mitchell in 1996. He talked about meeting with officials from 3 different countries who claimed that they had met extraterrestrials in person. Quote, "The evidence for alien contact was very strong and classified by governments, who were covering up visitations and existence of alien bodies in places such as Roswell, New Mexico." Mitchell's book, The Way of the Explorer, discusses his journey. In 2004, he told the St. Petersburg Times that the US government was studying alien bodies and that this group had specifically stopped briefing US presidents since the 1960s. He said, quote, "We all know that UFOs are real. Now, the question is, where do they come from?" In 2008, Mitchell then was interviewed and claimed that Roswell crash was in fact the aliens that had contacted humans several times, but that the government had hidden the truth for more than 60 years. Scary stuff, scary stuff. He sadly passed in 2016. If we just reread the credentials alone, just one more time. Number 2, James McDivitt. James Alton McDivitt is an American test pilot, Air Force pilot, engineer, and NASA astronaut who flew in both the Gemini and Apollo programs. After graduating first in his class with a Bachelor of Science degree in Aeronautical Engineering, he qualified as a test pilot at the Air Force. In 1962, McDivitt was selected by NASA for the Gemini 4 mission. In 1965, he saw, filmed, and photographed an object which approached the Gemini 4 as they were orbiting Earth. Over Hawaii, a craft of some sort. The UFO had a long arm sticking out of it. Here's what Major James McDivitt said. "I was flying with Ed White. He was sleeping at the time, so I don't have anybody to verify this story, but we were drifting in space when suddenly an object appeared in the window. It's a cylindrical object, white. It had a long arm that stuck out of the side. The film was sent back to NASA and reviewed by some NASA film technicians. One of them selected what he thought was what they were talking about, at least before I had the chance to review it, and it was not the picture. It was a picture of a sun reflection on the window. So what were the pictures that he was talking about? In 1975, McDivitt said, "I never made a big deal out of it. It was something I definitely couldn't identify. It looked like a beer can with a pencil sticking out of it. Yeah, I would eventually give up on that too if those were my credentials and people were like, yeah, right, James." When somebody has like 25 years of designing and flying space shuttles around, when they say, "Hey guys, I'm seeing something up here," it's not like, "Oh, James, clean those old specs, would you? Yuck, yuck." Houston, we have a problem. And number 1, Gordon Cooper. Leroy Gordon Cooper Jr., an American aerospace engineer, test pilot, US Air Force pilot, and the youngest of the 7 original astronauts in Project Mercury, the first human space program in the United States. You know the pictures. It looks like they're wearing a tinfoil suit, you know? Old school, old school. After service as a fighter pilot in World War II, he qualified as a test pilot in 1956 and then was selected as an astronaut in 1959. In 1963, Cooper piloted the longest and last Mercury spaceflight, Mercury Atlas 9. 34 hours in space. The first American to spend an entire day in space, the first person to sleep in space, and the last American launched on a solo orbit mission. In Cooper's autobiography, Leap of Faith, co-authored by Bruce Henderson, he recounted his experiences with the Air Force and NASA and an alleged UFO conspiracy. Cooper claimed to have seen his first UFO while flying over Germany, then saw them land in a dry lake bed. Cooper claimed up until his death that the US was indeed covering up UFOs. He said that there were hundreds of reports made by his fellow pilots, many coming from the military pilots on radar. In his memoirs, Cooper wrote that he had seen unexplained aircrafts tons in his career, and that in 1978 he actually testified before the United Nations on the topic. He sadly passed in 2004. He was such a strong advocate for disclosure, and all of these astronauts are remembered as putting their neck and name out on the line for some truth. But I mean, those UFO enthusiasts, huh? They're all wackos, right? Right?
Number 5. They say in space, no one can hear you scream. But what about a knocking? China's first man in space, Yang Liwei, might be able to tell you what the sound of a man screaming in space sounds like. The taikonaut, the term for an astronaut from China's space program, first visited the stars on a maiden voyage in 2003. While up there, soaring the cosmos, Liwei reported hearing something knocking on the spaceship's hull. He said it didn't sound like it was coming from inside the ship, but it didn't sound like it was coming from the outside of it either. Now, normally, you're not really supposed to hear, anything in space, so this was out of the norm. Liwei went to peer out the porthole just to confirm that there were no goblins or gremlins hanging on the outside of the hull ripping up nuts and bolts, and says he didn't see anything of any note outside causing the sound, which he claims sounded like someone banging on an iron bucket with a hammer. Now where it gets really interesting is that other taikonauts on the Shenzhou 6 and 7 spacecrafts in 2005 and 2008 both reported hearing the exact same phenomenon. One could be a coincidence, one can be explained off. But 3 separate occurrences of hearing something knocking on the ship's hull? Could it be something related to the shuttle's construction? Or is there something haunting the Shenzhou spacecrafts? Wait. Do you hear that? That knocking? It sounds like a transmission coming from inside the studio. Something, a voice telling me that you should subscribe to Top 5 Scary Videos for the best scary videos on the web. It's strange. I don't know what it means. Sorry, let's move on. Number 4. Now we know space is silent. I'd say no one can hear you scream, but I literally just used the alien joke on the last point, and I've hit my quota for 80s movies references already, and we're not even halfway through the list. I think the silence of the stars would drive me absolutely nutty. I don't know how I'd handle the quiet. I need something in my ears. In 1969, a triumvirate of 3 astronauts claimed they heard something pierce the silence. Apollo 10 astronauts Tom Stafford, Gene Cernan, and John Young, while on the surface of the moon, were photographing craters, making memories, that sort of thing, when all 3 of them unanimously claimed they had heard something ethereal on their headsets, claiming that they had heard a sound that was strange, melodic, and composed and otherworldly. All of them described it as music. Now, it's worth noting that it was 1969, so there was no chance that someone accidentally had just left an Aphex Twin album inside the ship's CD player. Commander Cernan said at the time, "We're gonna have to find out about this because no one is going to believe us. Don't worry. Just like the Ghostbusters, we're ready to believe you." And look at that, I snuck in another 80s movie reference without you even noticing. So what exactly was the crew listening to? Could it have just been something malfunctioning on the ship? Feedback from some equipment somewhere? Or could it have been some extraterrestrial entity trying to contact them, or getting caught on the airwaves? Now some speculate radio interference, but not everyone buys the official story, and NASA has never given an official answer. The biggest question remains though is, what does space music sound like? If I had to guess, I'd say probably like Grimes' music. I think that's what moon men are listening to. Number 3. When you think of an alien, what do you picture? A little gray thing with big black eyes peering out at you from a flying saucer? Maybe a regular looking man with pointy ears and a strong brow? Maybe a noble warrior with a cool energy sword? Point is, you probably picture something a bit bipedal because of sci-fi depictions, but it doesn't have to be that way. What about a snake? Space snakes. Why does it have to be space snakes? Dr. Story Musgrave has 6 degrees as a physician, former astronaut, and consultant for the Imagineers at Disneyland. Dr. Story Musgrave sounds like a completely fake man who has one of the coolest names ever, but he is very real, and he has one of the most impressive resumes on the planet. He can also boast that he's been to space on 6 separate occasions and has seen things you wouldn't believe. In a 1994 interview, Musgrave spoke out about coming into contact with something he believes to be extraterrestrial. He said, "I've seen a snake out there, 6-7 feet long. It's rubbery and it follows you for a rather long period of time. The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of living things out there. And that sort of thing brings to you a certainty that other living creatures are out there." Now, skeptics have dismissed this, of course, saying Musgrave just saw a hose or a loose bit of debris or something, but Musgrave insists that the entity he saw had its own method of propulsion and was following him around directly. He said he saw this creature on 2 separate occasions. Maybe it remembered him. Obviously, Musgrave is considered to be fairly reputable as far as NASA astronauts go, and I mean, if Disney trusts him, he must be pretty reputable. So it seems unlikely that he would tell a tall tale. When asked directly what he thought he saw up there, Musgrave said, "Living creatures far more developed as civilizations. They've been around for 100 million years, and we can't even conceive how advanced they are and the kind of things they're doing. That's why I make an effort to communicate. And I might be considered eccentric because I do, but I do tell them to come and get me. And you know what? Thank you, Musgrave. I'm glad someone is willing to be the spokesperson for aliens. Maybe offer them a ticket to Space Mountain. They might feel right at home at that. Or they might be very offended, I'm not sure. Number 2. Many who go to space see bizarre things that they can't explain. And yet many space travelers don't speak out about what they see, for fear of reprimandation of being deemed nothing more than a tinfoil hat wearing loon. Russian cosmonaut Major General Vladimir Kovalyonok said on the matter, "Many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years, I never spoke on such things." Well, let's take a listen to his story. In 1981, while orbiting outside of the Salyut station, Major Kovalyonok was exercising when he saw something traveling outside the station alongside the porthole. He claims he saw something outside the porthole that was an object he could not explain. He said it was something floating that looked a bit like a barbell, except it was transparent, and it looked like it had had something inside of it. He said he saw gas discharging out of it, like it was reacting. He insists that whatever he saw wasn't artificial, and that it moved in a way that suggested life. He said he saw it tightening and pulsating like an organ. He described the entity as being impossible within the laws of physics. As he was observing it, it combusted spontaneously in an incandescent ray of golden light. Seconds later, a golden explosion followed behind it, and 2 spheres of golden light appeared, which Kovalyonok described as beautiful. After the explosions, there was a white smoke and a cloud-like sphere, and as the station orbited around Earth's shadow, the spheres never returned. Unlike a lot of his peers, Kovalyonok was very willing to speak out on his experience about what he saw. There was a small investigation into the possibility that it could have been a missile test or a weapons test of some kind, but no conclusive answers were ever found. Whatever he saw, we may never get the truth. And to my Russian viewers, I am so sorry for that pronunciation. Number 1. Major Gordon Cooper is an American astronaut of some renown. The first astronaut to spend a full 24 hours in space, and the last American to spend a fully solo orbital mission. A renowned, reputable astronaut, he's very insistent about life beyond the stars. Near the end of a 22-hour trip around the planet in 1963, he claims that while ending orbit and returning home, he saw a glowing green ethereal orb following him approaching his capsule. The entity was even picked up by a tracking radar in Australia. And yet bizarrely, when he landed, reporters from NBC told him that they were barred from questioning him about the sighting and experience at all. This wouldn't even be Cooper's first experience with UFOs. In 1951, while on an Air Force mission flying over Western Germany, Cooper claimed to have seen metallic saucers flying in ways that would outmaneuver any American spacecraft. He said, "I believe these extraterrestrials and their crews are visiting this planet. Most astronauts are reluctant to discuss UFOs." Listen to this other quote from Cooper. "In the USA, every day our radar instruments capture objects of form and composition unknown to us. And there are thousands of witness reports and a quantity of documents to prove this. But nobody wants to make them public. Why? Because authority is afraid that people may think of God knows what kind of horrible invaders. We have to avoid panic by all means." Now, it sounds like Cooper is alluding to a cover-up. Gordon Cooper isn't just some nut on the street barking out to whoever will listen, but a respected, experienced sailor of the stars. So is this why most stories of UFOs get buried? And astronauts who speak out about it are all labeled as sensationalists? All because NASA thinks that people can't handle it? I think we're ready. I think the stories are starting to come out there. The truth is out there. And we will find it.
Number 5. Music on the Moon. In May of 1969, man had not yet set foot on the moon, and the United States and the Soviet Union were still locked in an expensive race to see who could get there first. Before the Apollo 11 mission could take Neil Armstrong to the moon's surface, where he could utter the famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," there was one more mission to complete. The crew of the Apollo 10's mission was to fly in orbit around the moon and launch its lunar module, which would go 15.6 kilometers above the moon's surface before returning to the main ship and returning to Earth. The mission was considered a dress rehearsal for the moon landing that would occur 2 months later in July of 1969. A last chance to iron out any kinks so that there would be no surprises on the big day. But the crew was in for a surprise no one saw coming. Music from another world. While the ship was making its orbit, it made its way over to the dark side of the moon. For an hour, the astronauts would be out of contact with mission control and would have to fend for themselves. Once out of contact with Earth, they began to hear strange whistling sounds coming in on their radio that they could not explain. The noise and their reactions to it were recorded, and once they were back in contact with mission control, They filled their superiors in on the situation. Many theories were offered as to the origin of these sounds, such as magnetic fields or atmospheric interference. But these theories were debunked, as not only does the moon not have a magnetic field, its atmosphere is too thin to carry sound. This bizarre occurrence didn't interfere with the mission, and it was considered a success, which led to the Apollo 11 mission achieving the impossible and putting men on the moon. But the tale of this cosmic whistling was classified, and no one on Earth knew about the mysterious space music until decades later, when NASA's archives were declassified and made available for public access. What was this strange music? Was it simply malfunctioning equipment? Or was it a symphonic congratulations from the other species of the universe, welcoming humanity to the stars? We may never know. Number 4. The Black Knight. This next story takes us through time, from the late 1800s all the way to the late 1990s, giving more than a century of lore to this supposed satellite from an alien world. In 1899, the famous inventor and physicist Nikola Tesla was conducting experiments with radio. During one of his tests, he claimed to hear a strange transmission that he believed was coming not from Earth, but from outer space. If this is true, it means that not only is Tesla the namesake for a line of self-immolating electric cars, he is also responsible for making first contact with alien life through an orbiting alien probe that had remained undetected by humanity for thousands of years. A similar story came to light in the late 1920s, when the radio engineer Jörgen Hulse also claimed to have picked up a strange transmission that had echoed back to him after a delay. These long-delayed echoes, as they were later named, still do not have an official explanation, but many theorize that they originate from the same supposed satellite as the ones detected by Tesla years before. Similar stories began to crop up from multiple sources, including a science fiction author by the name of Duncan Lunan, who claimed to have decoded messages from the Black Knight satellite, which had revealed the existence of an alien race in the Epsilon Boötis, a binary star system in the Boötis constellation. In 1954, a UFO researcher claimed that the United States Air Force had reported that they had evidence of 2 satellites orbiting the Earth, an unusual claim since no country had yet come up with the technology necessary to launch a satellite. In 1963, an astronaut named Gordon Cooper reportedly called in a UFO sighting while making his 15th orbit during the Mercury Atlas 9 space mission. However, this incident is notably missing from the official NASA mission log. The seemingly biggest boon of evidence came to light in 1998 during the STS-88 mission to the still under construction International Space Station, where the first US module was delivered to the ISS, making it an important mission in the history of space exploration. During the construction, one of the astronauts saw something unusual floating above the Earth and managed to snap a picture of it. This photo was latched onto by believers in the Black Knight satellite as proof of its existence. But as they often do, NASA decided to be no fun at all and crap in everyone's oatmeal. NASA claimed that the photo most likely showed simple debris. Space journalist James Oberg, a man with possibly the coolest sounding job title ever, theorized that it was a thermal blanket that had been confirmed lost by the mission that had made its way into the atmosphere and gotten tangled up into a strange shape before eventually burning up. Is there a satellite of alien origin orbiting the Earth that NASA doesn't want us to know about? Or are all these stories merely a combination of technical issues and enthusiastic theorists? Perhaps this is something to debate in the comments below. Number 3. The Brookings Report. In the year 1960, NASA's Committee on Long-Range Studies partnered with the Brookings Institute to create a report for the House Committee on Science and Astronautics titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. Not surprisingly, when talked about in general conversations between UFO and alien believers, it is referred to instead as the Brookings Report. This section theorizes about how the public would react to the discovery of alien life, and how it would affect society, and how the decision would have to be made on whether or not such a discovery would be made public. Some choice passages are as follows. Anthropological files contain many examples of societies, sure of their place in the universe, which have disintegrated when they have had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies, espousing different ideas in different lifeways. Others that survived such an experience usually did so by paying the price of changes in values and attitudes and behaviors. Studies might help to provide programs for meeting and adjusting to the implications of such a discovery. Questions one might wish to answer by such studies would include: how might such information, under what circumstances, be presented to or withheld from the public, for what ends? What might be the role of the discovering scientists and other decision makers regarding the release of the fact of discovery? While it is important to note that the report does not state whether the government should or should not cover up the existence of alien life, should it be discovered, it does state that this is a choice that would have to be made. This report was developed relatively early in the history of space exploration and was presented to policymakers, so we do know that people in charge of government policy were presented with a document that floated the idea of hiding the discovery of alien life from the people of Earth. I don't think the writers of the report were trying to hide anything, but the fact that a report featuring a section on what courses of action should be taken if hypothetically alien life were discovered makes me wonder if this was actually just a way to get the answers they needed without revealing the true implications of the report to the writers. Number 2. Why is NASA altering photos? NASA has a program called Picture of the Day where, predictably, they post a photo from their various rovers and satellites onto the internet every day for public consumption. One day in late 2014, the photo they posted was a picture taken by NASA's Cassini orbiter of Saturn's moons, Dione and Titan. It is a stunning photograph, but one internet commenter found something he did not expect when he downloaded and adjusted the photo. While adjusting the contrast and brightness of the photo, he found that it revealed a huge object behind one of the moons that was giving off a rainbow-like aura. Even more disturbing, he saw the photo had been altered with black markings covering whatever it was behind the moon, proving that NASA had altered the photo before posting it. He took his claims online where they started receiving some attention, but before long he received a comment from someone he was not expecting. The person who had edited the original photo. A NASA employee who explained that the photo was not edited to try and hide any alien craft, but to make up for the technical limitations of the Cassini orbiter as it photographed the two moons. As she explained it, Cassini takes color photos by snapping 3 sequential photos through red, green, and blue filters. In the time that separated the 3 frames, Dione moved, so if I did a simple color composite, I would be able to make Titan look right, but not Dione, or Dione look right, but not Titan. So, I aligned Dione, cut it out, then aligned Titan, and then had to account for the missing bits of shadow where the bits of Dione had been in the 2 of the 3 channels. While this does seem to be a plausible explanation as to why the photo was edited, the original poster remained skeptical. He believed it was possible that NASA had ordered the photo altered before posting it, and then released the explanation once they were caught. Of course, one could argue that if NASA had taken a photo that featured a UFO, and they didn't want the public to know about it, they could have just not posted the photo at all, rather than trying to Photoshop it out and hoping that no one noticed. Number 1. What is NASA hiding at the North Pole? In 2016, a researcher came forward claiming to have proof that NASA was trying to cover up something at the North Pole. He provided older satellite images that seemed to show some kind of crater or hole at the top of the Earth. He believed that this was evidence that supported the hollow Earth theory. The hollow Earth theory claims that underneath the surface of the Earth is more land, as well as a central sun located in the center of the Earth. The claimant says that these photos of a hole at the top of the Earth, first seen in satellite photos from 1968, may not be definitive proof that the Earth is hollow, but the hole's omission from subsequent satellite photos does prove that there is some kind of entrance at the pole that NASA is trying to hide. Many explorers have tried to reach this area hoping to prove the theory's validity, but many of them did not survive the journey, and those who did came back with stories that simply cannot be taken seriously. One group claimed that the hole was real, and that once they managed to lower themselves into it, inhabited by a small race of creatures. The explorers kept their distance but reported seeing some kind of factory in the distance that seemed to be running all throughout the day and night. Stranger still were the emissions being generated by the factory, as whatever was fueling it was giving off a smell not dissimilar to ginger. Not wanting to push their luck, the explorers took photos and came back the way they came, But when they checked their cameras, they found that some kind of magnetic interference from the pole had wiped their camera's memory cards. They came forward with these claims, and NASA firmly denied that their claims had any validity, saying that the explorers were simply mad or looking for attention. However, another government agency, NORAD, has been more forthcoming about what is happening at the North Pole, and released a report stating that it is a consistent site of UFO activity. Every year around the winter solstice, they've reported a small flying craft exiting the North Pole and traveling around the world at super speeds, seeming to visit every country on Earth in just one night, before returning to the pole and not being seen again until the next year. What is this strange craft? Is it traveling around the Earth in order to spy on its people? Is it friend or foe? What is the purpose of the bright red light shining at the head of the craft? Is it connected to the explorers' stories? And if so, why has NASA not come forward to us with information?
Number 5, the story of Edgar Mitchell. Edgar Mitchell is a storied man. He's part of an incredibly exclusive club out of 12 other people who can claim that they have seen the Earth standing on the surface of the moon. I assume they all have a group chat together. He's best known for typing 80 lines of code to save the Apollo 14 mission as it descended to the moon in 1971. He was the 6th man to ever walk on the moon, and he is a devout believer in aliens being out there. He insists that he knows that top government and military officials were hiding the truth behind aliens in New Mexico. He said it was a known secret that alien spacecraft were responsible for disabling nuclear missiles and shooting them down, supposing that aliens are directly involved in intervention to prevent us from destroying the planet. Which, if that's the case, I've got nothing but thanks to give for our extraterrestrial friends. Thanks for that. We're not that responsible. He goes on to insist that the Roswell incident was real, and the government had covered it up and buried it as a conspiracy theory to deter people from finding out the real truth, which he believes NASA thinks the public simply wouldn't be able to handle. In 2004, he told a Floridan newspaper that he knew of a secret cabal inside the American government that was responsible for studying alien bodies, and that after JFK, this group no longer answered to the president and didn't include the commander-in-chief in their briefings. Mr. Mitchell is quoted as saying, "They all know that UFOs are real. The question is, where are they coming from?" Now, NASA didn't quite have the same tune. NASA themselves obviously denied all of Mitchell's statements, saying that Edgar Mitchell is a great American, but we don't share his opinions on this issue. Well, of course. If you've been sitting on a secret for 60 years, you're not gonna fold over one guy, but a bunch of evidence? Well, maybe. My goblins, you know what time it is. If you've been digging the scares, stick around and subscribe for some scary stuff every single day. Okay, let's creep on. Number 4, Luis Elizondo. Luis Elizondo is one of the most outspoken believers in aliens and UAPs out there today, alongside Tom DeLonge, championing that he believes firmly that NASA and the Pentagon aren't telling us all the whole truth. And he would know, as Elizondo formerly led a research team to research potential UFOs. Although the project was disbanded, Elizondo never gave up his mission, believing it to be his personal calling to expose the truth. He's been quoted many times saying, "My personal belief is there's very compelling evidence we are not alone." He served on the Department of Defense and resigned in 2012 over excessive secrecy surrounding the UAP program. These aircraft, we'll call them aircraft, are displaying characteristics that are not currently within the US inventory, nor in any foreign inventory that we are aware of, Elizondo said of the objects they researched in his time there. He added that the program was founded to analyze unexplained aerial phenomena and ascertain whether or not that what they were seeing is a threat to national security or not. Kind of unnervingly, when asked about that, he said, "We found a lot. We identified anomalous aircraft that are seemingly defying the laws of aerodynamics." Which, oh hey, coming from the mouth of someone who worked at the Pentagon, that seems just a little bit suspicious, right? Right? Not just me? The quote continues, "Things that don't have any obvious flight surfaces, any obvious forms of propulsion, and maneuvering in ways that include extreme maneuverability beyond, I would submit, the healthy G-forces of a human or anything biological." Elizondo's gone so far in the past as to suggest that he thinks the US government has fragments of UFOs or UAPs somewhere, reverse engineering it to learn all their secrets. Sounds extremely like someone higher up didn't want people finding out about whatever Elizondo was getting onto. And why not? Number 3, the signal. Now, when it comes to aliens, we all kind of assume in the back of our heads that our first direct contact with them is going to be very up close and personal. That they'll come down and Hopefully we'll see them face to face or face to mandible, or perhaps we'll see their ships descending on us and it's already too late. But what if our first contact was something else? A radar signal, a noise through the silence of space. In 2003, astronomers working for the SETI, short for the Search for Extra Intelligence, a project dedicated to hunting for extraterrestrial life, were using a massive telescope to look to the stars. Now nothing much came of it except for a series of unexplained radio signals from the skies. These signals all disappeared over time except one, which was growing stronger and stronger. The signal comes from somewhere between the constellation of Pisces and Aries, and curiously, the signal is at a frequency that absorbs and emits energy. Naturally, the researchers found this a bit interesting. Some of the astronomers believe that this could be a frequency that extraterrestrials are using to try and get our attention, like an intergalactic "you up" text. While it could very well have turned out to just be totally nothing or some sort of natural explanation that I'm not nearly smart enough to understand, I'm gonna err on the side of extraterrestrials. But we have to wonder what the signal was, right? I mean, we have to admit that's a bit suspicious, that there's something worth looking into there. Now this story is from 2003 and I had trouble finding an update on it, but who knows? Whatever was broadcasting that could still be out there. Number 2, Blue Book. Now I think we all kind of secretly suspect that some of our tax dollars are going to research aliens. I mean, what else are they doing all day? Well, in one form or another, government agencies have always been researching UFOs and UAPs. Since 1949 to 1969, Project Blue Book was the code name for a secret government research division dedicated to analyzing UAP technology, analyzing whether or not UAPs on record were threats to air and national securities, and just what any of this stuff in the sky was. It was basically the closest thing we had to a real-life X-Files department, as far as we know. I mean, there could be an even more secret one. Surely with all that government money, they must have found something special, right? Well, if you'd like to feel like Agent Mulder yourself, you can scroll through 130,000 pages of declassified documents from UFO specialist John Greenwald, who made it all available for free online. He's a defender of free information. Greenwald says secrets are not bad things. I think we should know about this and it should be in the history books. John, I completely agree. All this stuff about cover-ups, we can totally handle finding out aliens are real, okay? You know, we're big now, we're responsible, we learned about Santa, we can do this. A couple years ago, we experienced a wave where there were clowns hanging out on the street corner of like every rural street in North America. We got over that. We all saw Tiger King together. Aliens won't even be that weird, I don't think. Now, Project Blue Book was officially disbanded because according to a joint review, nothing significant ever came from it. Now, since then, it was thought that no government agency was looking into UAP research at all, except until the UAP document quietly dropped this year, you know, sneaking it under the door that NASA and the Air Force had been researching aliens and possible sightings this whole time under everybody's nose, and they leaked a bunch of documents and footage, and you should look it up after this video because I'm not joking, it's totally real. It seems just like us, NASA can't rest until they find the truth out there. Number 1, new developments. We are probably coming to one of the most exciting times in UAP history. As after the UAP report came out, there is probably more legitimacy towards the discussion around the serious existence of extraterrestrial life now more than ever. As of October 2022, NASA is pretty much coming clean and opening a new study into the research of UAP and extraterrestrial life. 16 hand-picked specialists have been selected to analyze former data and determine how to go forward observing future events. Now, the study is less focused on whether or not previous sightings are confirmed UAPs, since it's kind of hard to ascertain with missing data. So it's more focused on what observations will be needed to understand UAP sightings going forward. The team is going to include researchers and key personnel from all divisions, all walks of life, notably including former astronaut Scott Kelly, who formerly served as a pilot for the Space Shuttle Discovery, and also once held the world record for most days in space, so he probably knows a thing or two about objects floating in the stars. Now, Kelly himself doesn't personally believe aliens have been to Earth yet, saying, "I think there's life in the universe. Hopefully intelligent life, but I don't think they visit planet Earth." So there's some skeptics on the team, but hey, at least they're finally coming out to get to brass tacks on this thing. Officially, openly, the government is talking with us about studying this phenomena. This is amazing. Now, you know how scientists are. They gotta have some numbers on a paper before they'll believe it. An associate administrator at NASA, Thomas Zerbchin, said, "Data is the language of scientists and makes the unexplainable explainable. Exploring the unknown of space and the atmosphere is at the heart of who we are at NASA. This is maybe the most exciting exciting time in history to be a UAP fan.
Number 5 on this list is danger. Maybe this number on the list would be better titled risk versus reward, honestly, because that's basically what it boils down to. Space travel is by far the most dangerous form of travel that we have. Like, everyone has heard someone tell them before that whenever you get in a car, you are taking a risk, which is true. You could get in a car accident at any point in time. But a lot of times, those car accidents result in little fender benders, and for the most part, nothing major. If your space shuttle breaks down though, like even if a tiny little thing goes wrong, then that is very likely the end of your entire existence. And obviously, we've seen this happen before. Several space shuttles have exploded or malfunctioned, and astronauts have in fact died because of it. There's always going to be an immense danger when someone steps into a space shuttle, and they're going to be risking their lives. Now, if the reward was incredible, then it might be worth it, but as we're going to talk about later in this video, the reward might not be that great. Like, at the end of the day, I truly don't think that I would be willing to go to space. I have the utmost respect for those who do decide to do it, but I just don't know if it's for me. The danger is just a bit too high. Number 4 on this list is aliens. Aliens, although unlikely, need to be considered when determining whether or not to go to space or not. If there is a risk that we could run into aliens, and in the process of doing so, piss those aliens off, then that would really not be very good for any of us. There have been tons of stories about aliens and the possibility of them being out in the universe at this point. In fact, I think it's pretty much an accepted belief that if the universe is infinite, then there has to be life somewhere else in the universe. But it could be closer than you think. One famous story is that of the knock. Tanya Sirohi writes, "First off, there's no sound in space. There's only vacuum. And this is precisely what makes this story a strange one. Back in 2003, astronaut Yang Liwei, the first to be sent into space by the Chinese space program, was sitting in his space shuttle when he reportedly heard a knock. He described it as someone knocking the body of the spaceship, just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer would sound. Apparently, he's not the only one to have experienced this. There were other Chinese astronauts between 2005 and 2008 who've reported hearing similar sounds. A lot of people have heard this story and credited it to being aliens. A lot of people have heard this story and credited it to being aliens that caused the sound. If that's the case, then it's something NASA really needs to consider if they ever want to go to space again. Number 3 on this list is space snakes. Now, I'm gonna be honest, guys, this one is just kind of silly, but I honestly just wanted to throw it in here because it really does make for a good story. And let's face it, if this story is actually true and it's all real, then I also would think twice about making another mission to space as well. Tanya Sirohi says, retired NASA astronaut Dr. Story Musgrave has a lot to his credit. So it would be difficult to pass this off as a lie, but he claims he saw an 8-foot-long white snake floating through space. It's not hard to imagine that this could have been a hose detached from the spaceship, but Musgrave, he remains adamant. So once again, folks, I want to reiterate that this is a bit of a silly entry, but if we suspend our disbelief for just 1 second, then it gets pretty terrifying pretty quickly. If there is actually just a bunch of giant white snakes floating through space, then I don't know if there's actually a large enough sum of money that you could pay me to go and fly into that. Also, who knows what these things would even be capable of? Maybe they're super smart and we just have no idea. I, for one, do not want to be the person having to find that out. Number 2 on this list is Elon Musk. So I entitled this entry Elon Musk, but ultimately it's just billionaires in general at this point. For some reason, it's not enough for these guys with billions of dollars to just own some fancy cars and yachts. No, they need to have their own fancy rocket ships as well. And they've made it their mission to fly to space in some capacity and do it before all of the other billionaires do it. Well, guess what? This is good news for NASA. SpaceX was founded in 2002 by Elon Musk. Google says Space Exploration Technologies Corp. is an American spacecraft manufacturer, space launch provider, and a satellite communications corporation headquartered in Hawthorne, California. It was founded in 2002 by Elon Musk with the goal of reducing space transportation costs to enable the colonization of Mars. NASA is probably loving the sound of that last bit there. Reducing space transportation costs? At the end of the day, NASA's whole mission isn't to worry about costs and other things. It's research. They want to research space and learn more about it. If I'm NASA, then I'm looking over at Elon Musk and thinking that this guy might be a really nice guy to get close to. Let Elon Musk do all the work and fit the bill of going to space, and you can tag along for the ride and complete your mission of researching stuff along the way. If someone else is going to do all the legwork for me, then it honestly just makes sense that I sit back and strap in for the ride. Billionaires, for whatever reason, have decided that they want to take the reins on this one, and I think NASA is happy to let them. And number one on this list is money. Even NASA, one of the richest organizations in the world and a group that is tackling problems such as space travel, runs into money problems. At the end of the day, our society is built on the back of the mighty dollar, and if you don't have enough of said dollars, then you're not going to be able to do what you want to do. Every time NASA launches a space shuttle to go into space, literally every single time, that is going to cost $450 million. That's just one space shuttle going on one single mission. Now, $450 million is a lot of money, but to a big corporation, that could be considered chump change if you think about it. McDonald's, for instance, is thought to spend over $1 billion every year on advertising in the United States alone. That's just on advertising, let alone all the money they spend on the actual product and labor and transportation and everything that goes into making their business run. However, McDonald's makes a lot of money off of those advertisements. They pump the money into silly commercials, and we pump our money into poorly made burgers. This sort of business model doesn't really translate to space travel though. At the end of the day, $450 million is nothing if that $450 million is being spent on an operation that could bring in $1 billion, let's say. But in this case, that $450 million isn't being spent on that. That money is being spent, and then they aren't getting any of it back. There aren't any McDonald's in space, and there isn't any willing customers to spend money on stuff up there. In fact, there really isn't anything there at all. Throughout history, people go where the money is. Usually, it doesn't even matter how dangerous things are. Mining for oil or coal was extremely dangerous back in the early days, but there was a lot of money in it, and therefore people did it. There just simply is not a lot of money currently to be found in space. If, for instance, someone discovered a rare and valuable mineral or rock that's sitting on the moon and it was something that people would pay lots of money for, then I guarantee NASA would be up and running and sending tons of space shuttles to the moon. I think maybe the thing that's so unsettling about this is that we could be missing out on tons of human progress, but money is holding us back. Like, maybe there are some really important things to be learned in space that we could be learning about right now if money wasn't a factor. Hopefully somebody is ready to fork over the big bucks soon and we can get some people back up in the air.
Number 5. Aliens on the Sun? In December 1995, the joint NASA-ESA Solar and Heliospheric Observatory Mission, or SOHO for short, was launched in an effort to study the Sun so that we could learn more about it. SOHO has allowed us to study the Sun inside out, helping us to learn about its internal structure, its extensive outer atmosphere, and the powerful solar winds that blow across our solar system. SOHO was integral in proving once and for all that the sun does not in fact wear a giant pair of sunglasses, as has been implied by several children's art projects. SOHO captures images across several different spectrums of light, most of which are then made available for public consumption on the internet. Most of these images are pretty innocuous, but sometimes someone will see something that can't be explained, proving that sometimes staring at the sun can be beneficial. A UFO enthusiast was looking at the photos of the sun and noticed a black square of the photo cut out. At first, he thought it was a technical issue, until he looked into it more. Here's the story as he related it. On June 28th, I found what looked like a mistake in the photo, but looks more like a black cube that is in orbit around our sun. Sure, one photo mistake, right? Wrong. NASA and SOHO have the most advanced telescopic equipment available. For a cube to be missing from the photo, either it was cut out by NASA to hide something, or is it a flying cube in orbit around the sun? Crazy? I think not. How often do you look directly at the sun? Never, because it will damage your eyes. So it would go unnoticed. However, scientists around the world have stated there are UFOs orbiting the sun many times larger than the Earth. I have recorded 3 instances of this cube flying around in different positions this month. For a long time, it was assumed that these squares were simply a computer glitch, but 4 years later, the squares showed up in a photo again. But the idea that this was a technical issue was called into question when separate UFO enthusiasts came forward with photos from a different SOHO camera that showed the square in the same spot. Is there a cube-shaped UFO orbiting the sun? Or is NASA editing out something from the photos before releasing them? If there is something there, what are they trying to accomplish by hiding it? Number 4. Neil Armstrong's alien encounter. On July 20th, 1969, history was made as the Apollo 11 lunar module landed on the moon, allowing its crew members, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, to become the first humans to ever walk on the moon. It was a landmark day for humanity, and Neil's first steps on the moon were broadcast on television, where it was witnessed by over 650 million viewers. During his moonwalk, he had access to 2 radio channels, one that would let everything he said be broadcast both to television and mission control, and another that would allow him to speak only to mission control. At some point in the moonwalk, Armstrong switched over to his private channel. When asked in later years why he had switched to his private channel and what was said, Armstrong said, "I have no comment on that, and am uncomfortable discussing the topic in any further detail." During the time that the radio communication was unavailable to the public, several amateur ham radio enthusiasts managed to tune in to the private channel. The following quotes from the incident have been corroborated by hundreds of unrelated operators who were all tuned in at the time. I say that there were other spaceships. Those are giant things. No, 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 this is not an optical illusion. No one is going to believe this. They're here, under the surface. We saw some visitors. They were here for a while observing the instruments. I say that there were other spaceships. They're lined up in the other side of the crater. My hands are shaking so badly I can't do anything. Film it. God, if these cameras have picked up anything, what then? I didn't have any film at hand. 3 shots of the saucers, or whatever they were, that were ruining the film. They've landed here. There they are, and they're watching us. In the years since, this was denied by Armstrong and NASA, but Buzz Aldrin did say there was at one point an unknown object tracing their path to the moon. Were some of the over 650 million beings watching the moon landing visitors from another world? We may never know for sure. Number 3. NASA cutting the live feed. Another of NASA's crown jewels is the International Space Station, which, as the name suggests, was built with the collaboration of other countries in an effort to collect data and therefore raise our understanding of the universe and our place in it. The International Space Station broadcasts a live stream that anyone on the internet can watch. but sometimes the feed is lost. Sometimes this feed going down feels somewhat convenient. On July 9th, 2016, the live feed showed a bright glowing object falling into view of the camera. Just as the object is about to get into a more viewable position, the feed dropped, and a message came on screen claiming that technical issues had caused the feed to cut out. One YouTuber grabbed the footage and uploaded it. In the caption of the video, he states that it wasn't necessarily an alien craft and very well could have been a meteor, but the fact that the feed was cut just before the camera could broadcast a clear look was inherently suspicious. A spokesperson for NASA came forward, saying the feed being cut was not a deliberate act, explaining that the station regularly passes out of range of the tracking and data relay satellites used to send and receive video, and telemetry from the station. For video, whenever we lose signal, the cameras will show a blue screen or a preset video slate. This explanation, of course, did little to appease the people of the internet, who had already decided that the feed was cut in an intentional effort to prevent the regular people of Earth from learning about visitors from another planet. But as far as explanations from government agency goes, this is one of the better ones I've heard. Number 2. The MJ-12 documents. When John F. Kennedy was made President of the United States in 1960, he quickly developed a reputation of not being a fan of the intelligence community. He believed that certain information should be shared with the people they were governing, and perhaps even more surprisingly, felt that some information should be shared with their Soviet counterparts in the interest of developing a relationship and de-escalating the Cold War in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He apparently drafted and sent a memorandum in 1963, 2 weeks before his death, that requested that NASA initiate broader cooperation with the USSR in their outer space and lunar landing programs. Part of this document says that NASA would have to share classified UFO secrets with the Soviets. It has been claimed that the idea of sharing this information with an enemy state was the last straw for the intelligence community, all of whom apparently formed together to pool information and plans in a group called the Majestic 12, which was supposedly formed by President Truman in 1947 to deal with UFO activity. In documents that had apparently been saved from a fire known as the MJ-12 documents, it is stated that Kennedy has been making inquiries about the Majestic 12's activities that cannot be allowed. The document goes on to talk about how the issue should be handled, saying that when conditions become non-conducive for growth in our environment, and Washington cannot be influenced any further, the weather is lacking any precipitation, and it should be wet. Well, for a layman, this is more confusing than anything. It may be clear when you consider that wet work is a euphemism for assassination. It should of course be noted that official government agencies claim that these documents are forgeries, but it's not like an intelligence agency partially responsible for the death of a president is going to verify documents that supposedly implicate that same government agency. Was President Kennedy killed for trying to force NASA to share information of UFOs with the Soviet Union? If these documents are authentic, it would certainly seem to be the case. Number 1. The Apollo 8 confirmation. The original goal of the 1968 Apollo 8 mission was to be the first craft to leave low orbit and fly in an elliptical medium Earth orbit. JFK had challenged NASA to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and that deadline was fast approaching. So, in order to make the most of their opportunities, NASA made a bold call and decided that rather than settling for medium Earth orbit, they would instead quite literally shoot for the moon, which they would then orbit before returning home. Apollo 8 launched on December 21st, 1968, and reached the moon on Christmas Eve. Millions watched as astronauts Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders made their orbit of the moon. Despite NASA having a reputation for planning everything down to the minutiae, the plans for this broadcast were surprisingly loose. As Borman recalled, "We were told that on Christmas Eve we would have the largest audience that had ever listened to a human voice, and the only instructions that we got from NASA was to do something appropriate." The astronauts chose to take turns reading from the book of Genesis while their craft made 10 orbits around the moon. As Lovell later said, "The first 10 verses of Genesis is the foundation of many of the world's religions, not just the Christian religion. There are more people in other religions than the Christian religion around the world, and so this would be appropriate to that, and that's how it came to pass. With the more sentimental aspects of the broadcast complete and their mission a success, it was time for the astronauts to come home. Mission Control waited anxiously as Christmas Eve turned into Christmas Day to find out if the engine burn for the craft to leave their lunar orbit had worked. Word soon came from Jim Lovell confirming not only that the ship was on its way home, but something else as well. Lovell's radio communication stated, "Roger. Please be informed there is a Santa Claus." In all the hubbub concerning the first lunar orbit, this news seemed almost like an afterthought. But the fact that a NASA astronaut confirmed that not only is Santa real, but that he lives on the moon is astounding. NASA never followed up on this information publicly, but what else have they learned since then? Are the legendary elves really moon people? Is the workshop located on the dark side of the moon? This is yet another example of NASA giving us bites of information that raise more questions than they answer.
Number 5 on this list is the Fermi paradox. This one is all about aliens, but maybe not how you might expect. Science Focus says, in 1950, Enrico Fermi, the man who built the first nuclear reactor, was having lunch in the canteen of the Los Alamos bomb lab in New Mexico when he suddenly said, "Where is everybody?" Everyone around the table knew exactly what he meant. Decades later, Fermi's question was examined independently by the American physicists Michael Hart and Frank Tipler. Hart considered aliens spreading throughout our Milky Way, and Tipler considered self-replicating machines that, on arrival at a planetary system, exploit the resources to build 2 copies of themselves that continue voyaging. Both concluded that even at modest speeds of travel, every star in the galaxy would be visited in a fraction of the age of the Milky Way. As Fermi realized, the aliens should be here on Earth. They do not appear to be, though. This became the Fermi paradox. Hundreds of explanations have been proposed. They include the ideas that we are the first intelligence to arise in the galaxy and so are totally alone, and that we are a nursery world off limits to advanced civilizations that might adversely affect our development. A more mundane possibility is that there is no paradox because any signs of visitation in the distant past would be erased by wind, rain, and geological processes. Recently, however, a team led by Dr. Jonathan Carroll Nellenbach of the University of Rochester, New York, has proposed that our sun may simply have been bypassed by a wave of extraterrestrial expansion. So why are aliens not here? Have they already been here and we didn't even know? Or did they just bypass our solar system altogether? Or is all of this nonsense and the universe is just so big that they haven't gotten to us yet? It's certainly something interesting to think about. Considering the universe is infinite and there are so many places and planets we don't know about, it seems ridiculous to think that we're the only intelligent life or the first intelligent life in everything. Like, that's as if we hit the biggest lottery ever. Comment down below what you think about this alien question and why aren't they here yet? Number 4 on this list is dark matter. You've definitely heard the term dark matter get thrown around a bunch before, and you've probably wondered, what the heck is it? Well, if that sounds like you, then you aren't alone. Scientists all across the globe are still wondering what dark matter is and the purpose that it serves. Science Focus says dark matter gives out no light or too little light for us to detect. We know it exists because we see the effect of its gravity on the visible stars and galaxies. For instance, the Milky Way could not have dragged in enough matter to make its stars in the 13.82 billion years since the Big Bang without there being a lot of invisible matter whose extra gravity speeded things up. The European Space Agency's Planck satellite found that dark matter accounts for 26.8% of the mass energy of the universe compared with the 4.3% of normal atomic energy. It therefore outweighs the visible stars and galaxies by a factor of 6. Puzzlingly, no Earth-based experiment has found any evidence of dark matter despite decades of searching. It is conceivable that it's not our theory of matter that needs modification, but our theory of gravity. Or that dark matter is not a fluid made of a single particle, but is complex like the atomic matter we see around us. Maybe the universe is filled with dark stars and dark planets and dark life. There is an entire universe of dark matter that we don't even know about. Like, what the heck is this stuff and what's it composed of? Why can't our eyes see it? Why doesn't something this dense even show up? It's all very confusing and nobody can figure it out right now. Dark matter is one of the biggest mysteries in the universe, and understanding what it is and how it works could completely change our understanding of gravity and matter as a whole. Hopefully NASA can get a grasp on it soon and the mystery can finally be solved. Number 3 on this list is the central black hole. At the center of almost every single known galaxy in the universe, which there are about 2 trillion of, there is a huge black hole just chilling in the middle. These aren't your everyday typical black holes though, they are gargantuan in size and weight. Some of these beasts weigh around 50 billion times that of our sun. Just an absolutely insane number that our brains truly can't really comprehend. But how did this absolute unit of a black hole get there, and why is it so big? Well, NASA doesn't really know, and they are desperately trying to find out. Black holes are one of the most interesting things in our universe, and one of the things that we know very little about. The question of where does a black hole actually go to will probably never be answered, because we'll never be able to go inside without getting completely crushed into oblivion. But figuring out why they're in the middle of pretty much every notable galaxy is important. If we can understand this, then we can understand how a galaxy is formed and potentially the lifespan of certain galaxies. Also, knowing what creates these black holes will help us better understand them and see if our planet will ever be at risk of such a disaster. Granted, maybe ignorance is bliss in this case, because even if we knew a black hole was coming, there's really nothing that we'd be able to do about it. Number 2 on this list is dark energy. For a long time, the only force that was thought to be operating on the entire universe was gravity. This was everywhere in the universe and decided pretty much how things played out. Gravity is not alone anymore though, or at least since the discovery of dark energy. Dark energy is this invisible force that is everywhere in the universe and is partially responsible for speeding up the expansion of said universe. Apparently, this energy overtook gravity 5 billion years ago as the dominant force that's expanding the universe, and that's why it's happening in the first place. The thing is, we have no idea what this dark energy is or why it's here. Similar to dark matter, it feels like this has just appeared, and because we can't see it or have no idea of its origin, we have no idea how much weight it really has on us and our current laws of physics. Apparently 2/3 of the energy mass of the universe is made up of this stuff, and we have no idea about it. That's kind of scary if you think about it, and it puts in perspective how little we know about things. Oftentimes, I think we fall into a trap assuming that our species is far more advanced than it actually is, but when you consider that we have no idea where 2/3 of the energy mass in our universe came from, or what it is, it really brings you back to reality. I feel like this might be one of the hardest mysteries on this list to solve, and it's gonna take a while. And number 1 on this list is the multiverse. What seems to be the staple of a plotline of any good sci-fi movie these days is the multiverse, something that we truly know nothing about. The theory is basically that there is an infinite number of universes with an infinite number of possibilities and outcomes, and it's all just freaking infinite and honestly kind of hurts my brain to think about for very long. But is there any substance to this theory? How will we be able to know if it's true or not, and what would that mean for us? So the multiverse theory all comes from another theory called inflation theory. Inflation theory is the thinking that in basically a second, when our universe was just a baby, everything started inflating and growing super fast, expanding outwards in all directions. Now, it's thought that the inflation of our universe stopped 14 billion years ago, but that when our universe stopped, the beginning of another started, and so on and so forth. It's very complicated, and in all honesty, I don't really understand all of it, but that's the bare bones. There's also the thinking that because life is so hard to support, as in you need so many things to go right in the universe, it seems extremely unlikely that if there is only one universe, life would have actually formed. If there were multiple or infinite universes, there would be enough chances though that one or more are bound to have the necessary things to create life. Either way, if this is true, then it obviously changes a lot of things about how we view our universe and the role we play in it. Maybe there's another version of you just chilling in a totally alternate universe right now, except instead of hands you have wings or something. A little ridiculous, I know, but if universes are infinite, then you never know.